The human farmer took pity on a stray alien girl. Now she's calling him her mate. The Martian sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a pale orange glow over the jagged red sands. Jack Harper leaned against the doorway of his barn, his weathered hand clutching a steaming cup of Martian cactus brew. Farming on Mars was no dream. It was grit, sweat, and the hope that the next season might finally yield enough to clear his debts. But Jack, a retired Earth Alliance Marine, had seen enough of war to know that peace, however harsh, was worth holding on to. It was the faint rustle inside the barn that first drew his attention. His eyes narrowed as he set down his cup and picked up a plasma rifle mounted beside the door. "Whoever's in there," he called, his voice firm, "come out slow. Hands where I can see him." Silence answered him. With a sigh, Jack switched on the rifle's flashlight and stepped inside. The beams swept over hay bales, rusted equipment, and shadows deep enough to hide just about anything. It wasn't until he heard a small, trembling whimper that he stopped, his instincts honed from years of battle urging him to lower the light. In the far corner, wrapped in a tattered thermal blanket, was a figure. A girl, at least, she seemed like one. Her translucent blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Wide, tearful eyes the color of molten silver stared back at him, and her slender fingers clutched the blanket like a lifeline. "Please," she whispered in accented English, her voice carrying an almost musical lilt, "do not hurt me." Jack lowered the rifle slowly, his expression softening. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, kneeling to her level. "But you've got about 10 seconds to tell me who you are and why you're hiding in my barn." The girl hesitated, as if weighing his words, then seemed to crumple under some unseen burden. "I am Liara," she said, her voice barely audible. I escaped. They are hunting me." Jack's brows knit together. "Who's hunting you?" She hesitated. But then the barn door creaked, a chilling wind sweeping in as if to honor her answer. "Bounty hunters," she whispered. "A dangerous choice." Jack's instinct screamed at him to send her away. He'd fought enough battles to know better than to get tangled up in someone else's war. But as he looked into those desperate eyes, something in him cracked. She was barely more than a child, her thin frame trembling with exhaustion. "All right, Liara," he said, standing and offering her a hand. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do." Her silver eyes widened with gratitude as she took his hand. "Thank you, Protector." The word hung oddly in the air, but Jack ignored it as he led her into his modest home. It wasn't much, a small, 2-room cabin built from Martian stone, but it was warm and secure. He gave her food and set her up on the couch, her exhaustion soon pulling her into a restless sleep. The Protector bond. The next morning, Jack woke to find Liara sitting cross-legged on the floor, her hands clasped in a strange gesture of reverence. Morning," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sleep okay?" "I did," she replied, her voice soft yet resolute. "And I have made my decision." Jack froze mid-step. "Decision?" She stood, her movements graceful despite the worn state of her body. "You offered me sanctuary. Among my people, such an act creates a bond. You are now my protector." He blinked. "You're what?" Her cheeks flushed a faint lavender, a sign of embarrassment, perhaps. "It is more than mere guardianship. To protect is to claim. Among my kind, it is akin to marriage." Jack's jaw dropped. "Now hold on a second. I didn't agree to anything like that." Liara's expression softened, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "It is not something you can refuse. The bond is already formed." Jack ran a hand through his graying hair, exhaling sharply. "Lady, I think we've got a bit of a cultural misunderstanding here." Before she could respond, the faint hum of engines echoed across the horizon. Jack turned sharply, his soldier's instincts kicking in. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, cursing under his breath. A sleek black craft was descending in the distance, its markings unmistakable. "Bounty hunters," Liara whispered, fear evident in her voice. "Stay here," Jack ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Lock the door. Don't come out unless I tell you." He stepped outside, rifle at the ready, as the craft landed with a hiss. Two figures emerged, hulking, armored brutes with plasma rifles slung over their shoulders. Their leader, a tall alien with scales that shimmered like oil, stepped forward, his sharp teeth bared in a predatory grin. "This is private property," Jack called, leveling his rifle. "State your business and get off my land." "We are searching for a fugitive," the leader said, his voice a guttural growl. "A girl named Liara. Hand her over, and we will leave you in peace." Jack didn't flinch. "Haven't seen her. Now get lost." The alien's grin widened. "You lie, human. We have her scent." The tension snapped like a coiled spring as the bounty hunters raised their weapons. Jack's marine instincts took over, and with a quick aim, he fired, dropping one of the brutes with a precise shot to the chest. The leader snarled, his scaled body glowing faintly as he activated a personal shield, defending the bond. The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. Jack ducked behind his tractor as plasma bolts scorched the air around him. His training kept him calm, every movement deliberate as he took down the second brute. But the leader was faster, his shield absorbing every shot. Jack was pinned down when the barn doors burst open. Liara emerged, her delicate features hardened with resolve. She raised her hands, and a wave of shimmering energy erupted from her body, knocking the leader off his feet. "You will not harm him," she declared, her voice carrying an otherworldly authority. The leader scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with fear. "A riftborn," he hissed, retreating to his ship. "This is not over." As the craft disappeared into the sky, Jack lowered his rifle, his heart pounding. He turned to Liara, who swayed on her feet, her energy clearly spent. He caught her before she fell, his voice gruff but not unkind. "We're gonna need to have a long talk about this bond thing," he muttered. She looked up at him, her silver eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you, Jack. You are my protector," he sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, don't make me regret it. A refuge, a revelation." The next morning, Jack stood in the doorway of his cabin, staring at the horizon where the bounty hunters had fled. The Martian sunrise painted the sky with fiery hues, but its beauty did little to soothe his frayed nerves. Inside, Liara sat at the kitchen table, her translucent blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light. She was sipping cautiously at a mug of cactus brew, her expression a mix of exhaustion and worry. Jack walked back inside, setting his rifle on the counter. "All right, Liara," he said, sitting across from her. "Time to talk. Who are you really, and why are those hunters so desperate to get their claws on you?" Liara placed the mug down carefully, her silver eyes meeting his with a mixture of guilt and determination. "I owe you the truth, Jack. I am not just a refugee. I am riftborn." Jack frowned. "You keep saying that like it's supposed to mean something." "It is a title," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "Among my people, the riftborn are rare. Those who can harness the energies of the dimensional rift that saved my ancestors from extinction. It gives us power, but it also marks us as valuable. My people were once hunted for this gift. We fled our homeworld to escape extinction." "Let me guess," Jack said grimly. "The bounty hunters work for someone who didn't get the memo." Liara nodded. "They serve the Syndicate, a galactic cartel that trades in rare and powerful beings. They believe I am the key to controlling the rift energy. If they capture me, they will enslave me, or worse." Jack leaned back, rubbing his chin. "And this bond thing? The protector stuff?" Liara's cheeks flushed lavender. "It is a cultural tradition. When someone saves a riftborn in their time of greatest need, a bond is formed, an unbreakable connection of loyalty and partnership." Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Liara, I'm no hero. I'm just a farmer trying to stay out of trouble." "You are more than that," she said softly. "You could have turned me away. You could have handed me over. But you didn't." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Jack felt the weight of them settle into his chest. "All right," he said finally. "If this bond is what keeps you safe, I'll roll with it. But don't expect me to start wearing a tux and giving speeches." Liara tilted her head, her expression quizzical. "Tux?" "Never mind," Jack muttered, rising to his feet. We've got bigger problems. If those hunters come back, we need to be ready. Preparing for battle. Jack spent the next few days fortifying the farm. He reinforced the barn walls with spare metal sheets, rigged a few old landmines around the property, and repaired the sensor array on the roof to keep an eye out for approaching ships. Liara helped where she could, her riftborn abilities proving unexpectedly useful. She could lift heavy equipment with ease and even repair complex circuitry with a strange, glowing touch. One evening, as they worked together to install a shield generator Jack had salvaged years ago, Liara paused, her gaze distant. "They will come for me again," she said quietly, "and they will not stop until they have me." Jack glanced at her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Then we make sure they regret it." Her lips curled into a faint smile. "You are a strange protector, Jack Harper. You act as though this is your fight." He straightened, meeting her gaze. "It is my fight. You're under my roof now, and I don't back down from bullies." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of profound gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Jack shrugged, turning back to the generator. "Just doing what's right." The Syndicate strikes. The attack came on the fourth night. The sensors blared a warning, waking Jack from a fitful sleep. He rolled out of bed, grabbing his rifle and rushing to the control panel. The screen showed 3 ships descending rapidly, their sleek designs unmistakably Syndicate. "Liara!" he shouted, pounding on her door. She emerged instantly, her silver eyes wide with alarm. "They are here," she said, her voice trembling. "Stay inside," Jack ordered, strapping on his combat gear. "If anything happens, use the escape tunnel under the barn." "No," she said firmly. "I will fight." Jack opened his mouth to argue, but saw the resolve in her eyes. He sighed. "Fine. Just don't do anything reckless." They moved quickly, taking up defensive positions around the property. The first ship landed with a thud, and armored bounty hunters poured out, their plasma rifles glowing ominously in the dark. Jack's traps took out the first wave, explosions lighting up the Martian night. But the Syndicate forces were relentless, advancing with brutal efficiency. Liara stood beside him, her hands glowing with rift energy. When the second wave came, she unleashed a blast of shimmering light that tore through their ranks, scattering the attackers like leaves in the wind. But then the Syndicate leader emerged, a towering figure encased in advanced combat armor, his shield crackling with energy. He raised a massive weapon, aiming it directly at Liara. Jack didn't hesitate. He stepped in front of her, firing his rifle in a desperate attempt to break the shield. The leader staggered but didn't fall. He raised his weapon, and Jack braced himself for the worst. That's when Liara stepped forward, her voice ringing with a power Jack had never heard before. "Enough!" she shouted, her body glowing brighter than ever. She raised her hands, and a massive wave of energy erupted from her, engulfing the battlefield. The Syndicate forces were thrown back, their ships disabled, their leader collapsing to his knees. When the light faded, Liara swayed, her energy spent. Jack caught her before she fell, holding her close as the Syndicate forces retreated in disarray. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. She looked up at him, her silver eyes shimmering with tears. "I could not have done it without you." As the Martian dawn broke over the battlefield, Jack realized their fight was far from over. The Syndicate would regroup, and their enemies would only grow more determined. But for now, they had won a fragile victory and forged a bond that would guide them through whatever came next. A new dawn on Mars. Jack stood in the pre-dawn glow, surveying the aftermath of the battle. The Syndicate's forces had been repelled, but their disabled ships scattered across his farm were a stark reminder that this was only a temporary victory. Liara leaned against the barn, her translucent blue skin pale and her movements slow, still recovering from the surge of energy she had unleashed. "You look like you need to sit down," Jack said, walking over to her. His voice was gruff, but his concern was evident. "I am fine," Liara replied, though her legs wobbled slightly. "The energy I used, it will replenish. It always does." "Yeah, well, let it replenish somewhere more comfortable," Jack said, guiding her back toward the cabin. "We've got a lot to talk about, starting with what just happened out there. Once inside, Jack set her down on the couch and went to grab a couple of water packs from the kitchen. He handed one to her and sat across from her, his rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. "So," he began, taking a long sip, "that light show you pulled off, how exactly does it work?" Liara hesitated, her silver eyes studying him intently. "It is difficult to explain. The rift energy is a connection to the universe's fabric, to the spaces between dimensions. I can draw from it, shape it, but it is not limitless. Every use drains me, and too much could," she trailed off, her expression troubled. "Could what?" Jack pressed. "Destroy me," she admitted quietly. "Or worse, tear a hole in the fabric of space itself." Jack cursed under his breath. "Great. So we're not just fighting off bounty hunters, we're sitting on a bomb." Liara flinched, but she nodded. "It is why my people fled our homeworld. The riftborn were seen as a threat, even among our own. Many feared what we could do if left unchecked." Jack leaned back in his chair, processing her words. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into something far bigger than himself. And these Syndicate folks? They want to weaponize you. "They want control," Liara said, her voice trembling with anger. "To use me to power their war machines, to expand their empire across the stars." Jack's jaw tightened. "Over my dead body." The offer. Before either of them could say more, a faint ping from the control panel in the corner of the room drew Jack's attention. He stood, his soldier's instincts kicking in as he crossed the room to check the system. The long-range sensor had picked up a signal, something big approaching. "What is it?" Liara asked, rising to her feet. "Ship," Jack muttered. "Doesn't look Syndicate, though. Too big, too well-armored." Liara joined him, her silver eyes narrowing as she studied the display. "It's a coalition vessel." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Coalition? As in the intergalactic government that doesn't like getting its hands dirty?" Liara nodded. "They maintain the peace, but only when it suits their interests." The ship landed a kilometer away, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Jack grabbed his rifle and motioned for Liara to stay behind him as they stepped outside. From the vessel's loading ramp, a group of uniformed figures emerged. Their leader, a tall human woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Jack Harper," the woman said, her voice cool but authoritative. "My name is Commander Mira Voss. I'm with the Coalition. We're here to negotiate." Jack snorted. "Negotiate what?" Voss's gaze shifted to Liara. "The safety of your riftborn companion and your survival. A fragile alliance." Inside the cabin, Voss laid out her proposal. "The Syndicate won't stop," she explained, her tone matter-of-fact. "Their resources are vast, and their reach extends to every corner of the galaxy. You can't fight them alone. And you're offering what? A rescue?" Jack's tone dripped with skepticism. "Protection," Voss corrected. "The Coalition has the means to shield Liara from their reach. But it comes at a price." Liara's eyes narrowed. "What price?" "You'll need to come with us," Voss said, looking directly at her. "We'll take you to a secure location where you can't be tracked. But Jack stays here." "No deal," Jack said immediately, crossing his arms. "If she goes, I go." Voss raised an eyebrow. "You're a retired Marine, Mr. Harper, not a hero. This isn't your fight." Jack's voice turned steely. "It became my fight the second those Syndicate bastards set foot on my farm." Liara placed a hand on Jack's arm, her touch light but firm. "Jack," she said softly, "you don't have to do this for me." "Yeah, I do," he replied, meeting her gaze. "I made a promise, remember? Protector and all that." Commander Voss sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Fine. You both come. But understand this. If the Syndicate finds you again, the Coalition's patience will run out." The journey ahead. The Coalition ship lifted off hours later, leaving behind the scorched remains of Jack's once quiet farm. As the vessel cut through the thin Martian atmosphere, Jack sat beside Liara in the cramped passenger bay, his rifle resting across his lap. "Where are they taking us?" he asked, glancing at Voss, who stood by the cockpit. "To a Coalition outpost on Erythra," she replied. far enough from Syndicate space to buy us time. Jack looked at Liara. You holding up okay? She nodded, though her silver eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. I am grateful for everything you've done. Well, Jack said, leaning back in his seat, let's hope it's enough. As the stars stretched into brilliant streaks outside the ship's window, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only beginning. Somewhere out there, the Syndicate was regrouping, and the rift energy that coursed through Liara was a beacon for danger. But for the first time in years, Jack Harper felt alive. He had a purpose, a fight worth fighting, and a bond he was beginning to understand was more than just duty. It was destiny. The rift awakens. The Coalition ship exited hyperspace above Erythra, a remote, barren moon orbiting a gas giant. The outpost below shimmered with the faint glow of protective shields, a testament to the Coalition's advanced technology. Jack stood at the viewport, his arms crossed as he took in the desolate landscape. Beside him, Liara was silent, her silver eyes reflecting the distant stars. We're safe here? Jack asked Commander Voss as she approached. For now, Voss replied. The outpost is off the Syndicate's radar, but I wouldn't get too comfortable. They have ways of finding what they want. Liara's gaze didn't waver from the stars. They will come. They always do. Jack glanced at her. Then we make sure they regret it. Voss studied them both, then sighed. You two are either the galaxy's best hope or its greatest mistake. Let's hope it's the former. A dangerous revelation. The outpost was more advanced than Jack had anticipated. Beneath its rugged exterior lay vast research facilities, high-tech defenses, and a small but skilled crew. The Coalition had no intention of merely hiding Liara. They wanted to understand her. Days turned into weeks as Liara submitted to a series of tests. Scientists sought to measure her connection to the rift energy, hoping to harness its potential. Jack remained by her side, his protective instincts sharpening with each passing day. It was during one such test that everything changed. The room was filled with holographic displays, glowing symbols dancing in midair as Liara focused her energy. The lead scientist, Dr. Elin Cord, observed with a mix of awe and unease. Her energy levels are rising exponentially, Cord murmured. This is unprecedented. Liara's hands glowed brighter, the air around her humming with power. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening crack as a tear in reality appeared. A jagged, swirling rift that pulsed with otherworldly energy. Shut it down, Cord shouted, but it was too late. The rift expanded, and from its depths emerged dark, writhing shapes. Creatures of shadow and void poured into the lab, their forms twisting and shifting as though they defied the laws of physics. Jack sprang into action, his rifle blazing as he fired at the intruders. What the hell are these things? He shouted. They're rift spawn, Liara gasped, her voice strained. Manifestations of the rift's instability. They shouldn't be here. As the creatures swarmed, Liara's energy flared. She raised her hands, her silver eyes glowing as she unleashed a wave of light that tore through the rift spawn. The creatures dissolved into nothingness, and the rift began to collapse. When the dust settled, the lab was in ruins. Liara swayed on her feet, and Jack caught her before she fell. Dr. Cord's face was pale as she stared at the spot where the rift had been. This isn't just about the Syndicate, Cord said, her voice trembling. The rift itself is unstable. If it collapses entirely, it could tear the galaxy apart. The Syndicate strikes back. The Coalition's worst fears were realized when the outpost's sensors detected a fleet of Syndicate ships closing in. The rift's opening had acted like a beacon, drawing their forces straight to Erythra. Jack and Liara stood in the command center as alarms blared. Commander Voss barked orders to her crew, her calm demeanor giving way to urgency. We don't have the firepower to hold them off, she admitted. We need to evacuate. Jack shook his head. If we run, they'll just keep chasing us. We end this here. And how do you suggest we do that? Voss snapped. Liara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. I can stop them. Jack turned to her, his expression hard. Liara, no. We'll find another way. There is no other way, she said, her eyes meeting his. The rift energy is tied to me. If I unleash its full power, I can destroy the Syndicate fleet and seal the rift. Jack's stomach twisted. And what happens to you? She hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. It doesn't matter. What matters is protecting the galaxy. No, Jack said firmly. We do this together. We find a way to save you, too. The final battle. The Syndicate fleet descended on the outpost like a storm, their ships blotting out the sky. The Coalition's defenses held briefly, but it was clear they couldn't last. In the heart of the outpost, Liara prepared for the final confrontation. Jack stood beside her, his rifle slung over his shoulder. If you think I'm letting you do this alone, you don't know me very well. She smiled faintly. You are stubborn, Jack Harper. And you're not leaving me with much choice, he replied, his voice softer. We fight together. Always. Liara closed her eyes, drawing on the rift energy one last time. Her body glowed brighter than ever, and the air around her shimmered with raw power. As the Syndicate's forces breached the outpost shields, she unleashed the energy in a blinding wave. The rift reopened, its swirling depths pulling in the Syndicate ships. Jack stood at Liara's side, firing at anything that approached, his resolve unshaken. Together, they pushed the rift energy to its limits, sealing the tear and obliterating the Syndicate fleet in a final, brilliant explosion. A new beginning. When the light faded, the battlefield was silent. The rift was gone, and the Syndicate's forces had been wiped out. Liara collapsed into Jack's arms, her body frail but alive. It's over, she whispered, her voice weak. Jack held her tightly, his own exhaustion threatening to pull him under. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. It's over. The Coalition would arrive hours later, their forces securing the outpost and salvaging what remained. Jack and Liara were hailed as heroes, their bond now a symbol of hope for a galaxy that had teetered on the edge of destruction. As they looked out at the stars from the Coalition vessel, Jack turned to Liara, his voice quiet but firm. So, what's next? She smiled, her silver eyes filled with a new determination. Whatever comes, we face it together. And as the stars stretched out before them, Jack Harper and Liara knew that their story was far from over. It was only the beginning.